Today, my wife gave birth to a child, and my marriage died. Well, I'm 90% sure he died, but I'll have confirmation in a few hours. Usually it takes longer, but due to the circumstances, the hospital rushed the DNA test. Of course, I'm sure this won't change anything. My phone is blowing up on the table as I sit in a bar 10 minutes from the hospital. I continue to stare at the screen, even though I know the doctor won't call me for at least a few more hours. The calls I ignore are from my wife, children, and relatives. I'm sure they all want to know what the hell is going on. But when it comes down to it, so do I. The baby is absolutely beautiful, with blonde curls like her mother. She was born weighing 7 pounds and 19 inches long. An ideal, full-fledged baby. Except, according to my wife, she was at least 6 weeks premature. Of course, I don't have a medical degree, but I'm also not an idiot. A child born so early would not look so perfect in its development and coloring. My wife lied to me big time, and now that I've taken off the blinders of absolute love, I know that my greatest fear has come true. The child she tried to pass off as mine is, in fact, the offspring of my late best friend. The waitress leaves me a fifth of Jack Daniels. At this rate, I'll spend $150 on a bottle that sells for $25. I just don't care. I'm falling into a coma again. 3 Amigos was a lifetime ago, literally in Gary's case. He, Tracy, and I had been inseparable since our families moved into the same neighborhood for 2 years when we were 5 years old. Gary's family and my family moved into the same house over the summer, and Tracy's family moved into the same house the following spring. By that time, Gary and I had already become close, but Tracy fit into our family without any problems, because at the time, she was a complete tomboy. She ran faster than me and was stronger than Gary, and there wasn't a single sport or game we played without her. When other girls in the neighborhood were playing with dolls, Tracy would play kickball or stickball with Gary, me, and the other boys in the neighborhood and compete with them. Things changed somewhat when we became teenagers. Tracy, in particular, has changed from a physical point of view. From a thin blonde with long pigtails, she turned into a young lady with growing breasts, a slender ass and legs, and flowing silky hair. Gary and I both noticed the changes, but we never spoke about it out loud for fear that Tracy would trample us into the dirt. Although a year later we were still inseparable, I no longer minded the rare occasions when Gary wasn't around for one reason or another. In moments like these, Tracy and I seemed closer, both physically and mentally, and in fact, I had my first kiss one summer Sunday afternoon when Gary was out with his family, and Tracy and I were sitting together on my swing, on the porch. I don't even remember what we talked about, but suddenly she leaned towards me and softly kissed me on the lips. Her lips were full and soft, and tasted like the strawberry chapstick she always used, and my brain suddenly did a very good imitation of the TV losing reception and being completely covered in snow. "Wow," I whispered, completely unable to say anything else. Tracy blushed as we closed our eyes. I reached out with my left hand, took her right hand in mine, and we just sat together and swayed. Gary came back to us the next day, and if I hadn't been part of the kiss the day before, I would never have believed it happened. Tracy returned to her usual reserved demeanor, without the slightest hint that anything different had happened. At some point during the day, I even tried to take her hand in mine, but she very calmly pulled it away. I was puzzled, to say the least. The Christmas dance of my freshman year was approaching, and I thought it was the perfect time to make the official move on Tracy. She, Gary, and I were walking home from school when I swallowed hard twice and then asked, "Trace, if you're not doing anything for the next month, would you like to go to the Christmas dance with me?" Tracy, who had been standing between Gary and me as we walked, stopped, causing both Gary and I to stop. I noticed a smirk appear on Gary's face as we stopped. I'm already going with Gary. He asked me yesterday, Bobby." Tracy looked awkward, Gary was smirking, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "Sorry, Bobby." "You overslept, you lost," Gary snorted. I felt like a fool. Firstly, I had no idea that Gary had any thoughts about Tracy. And secondly, because it's one of those unwritten codes. Don't get involved with someone else's girlfriend, even if I just found out about this. Hey, Gar, I didn't mean anything by asking. I didn't know, buddy. I got it, Bobby. We're fine, he said cheerfully. Tracy fidgeted and looked awkward the rest of the way home. He and Gary were making small talk, and I was silent. I didn't ask anyone else to dance, and I didn't become a deer. Yes, I felt betrayed by both of my best friends. My father saw me moping around the house on the night of the dance and knew the reason why. My parents were in our family room watching TV, and I was in my bedroom listening to music on the CD player when there was a soft knock on the door and my father poked his head in. "Girls, right?" he said, coming in and sitting in the chair at my desk. "You can't live with them, but you can't kill them either." I shook my head to clear away the cobwebs. I looked at him as if he had just stepped off the moon. He grinned wryly, the grin I knew so well. "Thank you, Dad. We had a good talk," I said. After the Christmas dance, 3 amigos became 2 amigos and their friend, and nothing more was said between us. We still worked out together, but Tracy and Gary were now an official couple. They remained that way throughout high school. Eventually, I started dating other girls. Finally, the 2 amigos separated in college. Tracy went to Michigan State, and Gary went to the University of California. I also went to Michigan State, but because of my own man code, I barely spoke to Tracy my freshman year. She seemed puzzled by this development, but I didn't want anyone to accuse me of trying to take her away from Gary. Tracy's mom actually came up to me one day and asked if I was angry with her daughter. Rhonda and Mark Ford were practically like parents to me, and I respected them as much as I respected my own parents. "She misses the old days, Bobby," Mrs. F. told me. "It will never be like this again, Mrs. Ford. We are no longer 7 years old. And besides, if she's not dating me, then I can't think of anyone better than Gary," I replied. The situation did not change during my sophomore year, but at the end of my junior year, Tracy invited me to be her date at her fraternity formal. I was surprised and wary. "Tracy, aren't you still dating Gary?" I asked. "I really don't want to come between you." "Gary and I broke up after the summer," she said. "He told me he was going to stay in California after high school to go to law school, and he didn't want to keep me for 3 more years. "Law school, Gary?" "I never imagined this," I said. Our first date was tentative at best. She asked if I would consider asking her out on a second date. On the second date, we kissed, and on the 4th, we had sex. I noted to myself that she was not a virgin, but if she wasn't paying attention, then neither was I. We dated for the next 2 years before we got married. Although I was against it, Gary was my best man. It was a little awkward for both of us. I mean, having a guy as your best man who has previously dated and had sex with the woman you're marrying isn't exactly standard operating procedure. Gary moved back to California right after the wedding, and I didn't think about him for over 20 years. Our daughter, Kaylee, was born 2 years after our wedding. Our son, Jeffrey, arrived 2 years later. We learned from my mother that Gary rarely comes home. Our parents still lived on the same block, and Mrs. Prescott told my mom that Gary had come home to say goodbye. He had cancer and had less than a year to live, so he wanted to see his parents while he was still fit. My mother asked his mother if a meeting could be arranged so he could see his old friends and other relatives. His mom thought it was a great idea. Gary was in the early stages of treatment and still looked quite well, although it was obvious that he was incredibly depressed. He was single, divorced twice, and had no children. He, Tracy, and I must have spent at least 6 hours talking about life, his life in particular, and how it would end. Towards the end of the night, Tracy came up with an idea that would ultimately destroy our marriage. "How about we come and take care of you until it's time for you to go into hospice?" Tracy asked Gary. Gary and I were shocked by what Tracy offered. This wasn't something she and I had talked about, and at first glance, I wasn't sure how we'd even pull it off. "He's our oldest friend, Bobby. Who else should do this?" "But the doctors say I may have several months before I need hospice," Gary noted. Of course, you guys can't quit your jobs and sit with me. You're currently paying for 2 kids in college. I work for a national insurance company that really likes family vacations, Tracy explained. Bobby can use his vacation and get some personal time. That could be about 2 months total time, dear, I remarked. This is not enough. Well, you can take it a week at a time and stretch it out to 4 months. The rest of the time, I can handle it myself. I didn't like where this was going. I knew Gary was an old friend, but my wife had just volunteered to spend a few months away from me and our home to care for him. And since she did it right in front of him, that meant I'd have to look like the world's biggest bad guy to refuse her offer. But still. Tracy, this is a bold commitment, I started to say, but she gave me a sarcastic look, interrupting me. Then it's decided. That's what we'll do. I swallowed hard and bit my tongue. That evening, I barely had time to walk through the door before I exploded. What the hell, Tracy? Are you going to leave me for 6 months or so to babysit with your old boyfriend? You are selfish, she shouted at me. So that's what it's all about. You can't forget that he slept with me before you. That night, I slept in Jeffrey's old bedroom. It took us 3 days to come to some sort of agreement to help Gary, which in married parlance means Tracy got her way, and we did everything exactly as she promised Gary. Gary was humble and grateful. I can't even begin to imagine how many times he thanked Tracy and me. I have to admit that after the first month, I felt like a bit of a selfish idiot. I also have to admit that after the first month, I was exhausted from work, taking care of the house, and helping Tracy care for Gary, who had both good days and bad days. Maybe it was because I was tired, but by the second month I felt that something was wrong between Tracy and me. I knew she must have been tired of everything she did for Gary, more than I thought necessary sometimes, so I didn't spend too much time worrying about it. What bothered me more was the glances that Tracy and Gary slyly exchanged several times while I was there, as if they had their own special language. Over the next 2 months, everything went downhill. Several times I felt like I was imposing my presence on them. I was also somewhat surprised that Tracy seemed a little reserved in our sexual encounters. After a week apart, I was ready to attack her when I met her, but she seemed almost bored. Again, I chalked it up to mental and physical fatigue. After 4 months, I ran out of days, and although Gary's condition worsened, I knew he still had some good time left. Tracy will have to carry the load alone, and I will have to accept the fact that I will be alone for a month or more. After my vacation ended, our daughter Kaylee pitched in to help, which I thought was great since Gary was her godfather. She spent 2 separate weeks helping her mother. About a month later, Gary had to go into hospice care, and another month later, he was gone. I flew to California once again for the funeral. Tracy was as inconsolable as Gary's parents. Both of his parents thanked Tracy and me endlessly for helping Gary. I deflected most of the thanks towards my wife. For the first week after returning home, Tracy acted almost distant towards me, which I attributed to grief. Then it was like a switch was flipped, and for the next 3 weeks, we made love or sex every single day. I felt like a child again. A month after we returned home, I got the shock of my life when Tracy walked out of our bathroom with a positive pregnancy test. Thinking back on it, I should have been shocked that she didn't seem shocked herself, but I was too busy trying to stay on my feet after her statement. Tracy and I were 45, our kids were 22 and 20, and wait, wasn't she on the pill? Sorry, baby, but I forgot to take the pills with me to California, and when I got out of the habit of taking them, when I returned home, I no longer remembered it. You know that none of us believe in abortion. We can do it again, you and me. I heard myself agreeing with her from somewhere inside my head. Holy crap, I'm going to be a dad again. I walked around with a stupid grin on my face for about a week. It didn't hurt that, as with previous pregnancies, Tracy's libido was high and we had sex every night. Sometimes twice a night. It was almost too much. Almost. When my daughter came home for the long weekend, she and Tracy went out for the day, shopping for maternity and baby supplies. We have long thrown away and given away everything that was from our previous children. The girls returned home happy and joking, and I probably took a dozen bags out of the car. The girls quickly prepared dinner, and we all laughed as Tracy told us her random thoughts about the difference between what she buys today and what was available a couple of decades ago. She also noted that she didn't feel completely comfortable in the maternity clothes she bought because they were all made for women 10 to 20 years younger than her and made her feel a little out of place. Tracy grew bigger and, in my opinion, more beautiful every week, despite my constant feelings of anxiety. I just couldn't understand what was going on, or maybe I just didn't want to understand what was going on. A few months later, I was in the office when I received an unexpected call from Tracy, who had taken unpaid leave, returning to work for only 3 months. "Hey, Daddy, how about we take the girl to the hospital today?" she asked in a sultry voice. Since, as far as I knew, Tracy was only about 6 to 6.5 months old, and the tone of her voice was incredibly sexy, I had no idea what she was asking me. "Why to the hospital, dear? Is there something wrong?" I asked, with more than a little concern in my voice. "Well, baby, my water broke, and I'm just too lazy to go to the hospital," she purred. Oh, shit. That's all I could answer. I grabbed my car keys, ran into my boss's office to tell him my news, and ran to my car. I live 15 minutes from the office, but that day I got there in 12 minutes. I kept thinking Tracy was awfully unflappable, considering her sentence was only 6.5 months. I knew that premature birth does not have the best effect on the child's health. I couldn't believe how calm Tracy was when I got home, but having 2 other children must have given her that confidence. I was even more nervous than with my first 2 children. 10 hours later, I was the father of a beautiful, perfect second daughter. Except I wasn't. The sick feeling in my stomach can't even explain how bad I suddenly felt. After the nurse took the baby to clean her, she began to hand her to me, but I instinctively pulled back, much to the nurse's shock. "This is a full-fledged child, isn't it, Doc?" I asked, in no more than a whisper. She looked at me, then at Tracy, who was still being cleaned by another nurse. They exchanged meaningful glances, then I saw Tracy shake her head almost imperceptibly. "Sorry, Mr. Marsley, but I do not have permission to discuss the child's health with you. You are not on the privacy list." "It's he pay," she replied. I'm not proud of myself, but at that moment, I lost my temper. "Damn, he pay!" I shouted, while she and all the nurses in the delivery room jumped back. "If this is my child, I have every right to ask about her health, and if he is not mine, and you know this, then you cannot, by law, write my name on the birth certificate without my permission. And he's not there. Now bring me this goddamn DNA test." It was deathly quiet as I turned on my heel and walked out of the delivery room, shedding my maternity clothes as I went. As I left the hospital, I caught a glimpse of my parents and Tracy's parents in the delivery room. I stopped at the bar for shots 6 and 7 and ate a hamburger. By this point, almost everyone in my life had called me, except the doctor with the DNA results. I guess that Tracy didn't want to waste anyone's time because at this point, everything was pretty much decided. Oh, damn. Probably 7 shots of Jack and a ton of stress. More important than the fact that your wife gave birth to someone else's baby, because that night, I slept like a rock. My voicemail and message boxes were completely full. Assuming nothing happened after I left, I should have brought Tracy and the baby home today. I showered and headed to the hospital, feeling a little worse than terrible. Tracy was breastfeeding when I came into her room. I walked in and sat down on the chair next to her bed without saying a word. The baby was dozing, so Tracy took her away and put her in the bassinet next to the bed. "I don't even know where to start, Bobby," Tracy said quietly, as her eyes began to fill with tears. "This shouldn't have happened. I went there to help him and be his friend, honestly. But then he had a few bad days in a row, and at one point, he was crying in my arms. And then we ended up in bed, and everything was fine, like before. And once that happened once, it was so easy to continue, except when you came to help. Then you and I slept together again, and it was awkward, and I felt guilty. But I didn't know how to stop. Or maybe I didn't want it to stop. We slept together for 4 months. The last two non-stop when you weren't around. But honestly, you and I made love when I wasn't on the pill, and you could have just as easily gotten me pregnant. Except that wasn't the case. She kept her eyes on the child as she told me her story. I slowly absorbed it until... Wait, you had sex with Gary while Kaylee was visiting? I asked in a daze. Tracy blushed crimson, and it took all my self-control not to choke her. She knew and didn't say a word to me, I exclaimed in complete disappointment. Tell me that you at least threatened her or bribed her in some way. This can't be true. Did Jeffrey know too? What about our parents? Does the whole fucking world know that I am a goddamned cuckold? Tracy's eyes widened and tears slowly fell from her eyes. I know my daughter, Bobby. I just knew she would understand, so we never tried to hide it from her. Yes, I asked her not to tell anyone. I told her it was on me, Tracy said. No, Jeffrey didn't know and still doesn't know. Nobody knows but you, me, and Kaylee. I want things to stay this way too, so we can do what's right for Bobby Geraldine. I know she's not technically yours, but she's yours now, and we need to be the same parents to her that we were to Kaylee and Jeffrey. We are her parents. Dot. End of story. We are doing this for her and in honor of our best friend. Best friend? I asked again. I obviously wasn't his best friend, otherwise he couldn't have slept with my wife. You can't do that to your best friend. He was dying, Bobby. Moreover, he and I had sex before. Yes, but you didn't have sex with him while you were married to me, unless you tell me something else. Her blue eyes almost glowed with anger. No. Bobby Geraldine? Is it true? Is this supposed to soften me up? What's her last name? Bobby Geraldine Martin. This is my last name too, remember? But on the birth certificate, she is listed as Gary's daughter, although no one but you and I should see that document if you still intend not to be listed as her father. Oh, yes, I croaked. Why, Bobby? He was our best friend. He's gone. I gave him comfort and love in his last days. Is it that bad? You sound so sympathetic. But you were a married woman. You've crossed the line with your compassion. You didn't ask me before you broke your vows, broke our trust, and disrespected me. Yes, I understand that this is your body and you do not belong to me. But we took a vow of fidelity before God and our families. At least we should have discussed this first. Our vows were not made in a vacuum, and I will not for anything in the world raise a child who was spoiled by another man with my cheating wife. It's Gary's baby, Tracy whined. Would you think about raising her if Gary died and she was left alone? No, I wouldn't think so, but I never agreed to raise his beloved child with you, I said sadly. You know I love you, Bobby. I don't want to lose you and what we have because of this. Mistakes, I said, completing her sentence. No, I wasn't going to say that, she replied. Okay, maybe it wasn't the best decision I've ever made, but I'm not going to call it a mistake. The mistake is that we didn't discuss this first, and that's my fault. We didn't discuss this first because you knew I would never agree to you sleeping with Gary, let alone having a child with him, I growled. And if it weren't for your pregnancy, you probably would never have told me about sex. Despite the way you say it all started, you made a strong-willed decision to continue doing this, and you even did it in front of our daughter. I know how to spell humiliation, and it's B-O-B-B-I. Thank you very much. Kaylee and Jeffrey were both home from college the following weekend to see their new sibling. I was lukewarm at best when my daughter walked into the house and she looked guilty. That evening, Kaylee and I cooked dinner together after she and Jeffrey spent about an hour talking about the baby. She never looked at me directly the entire time we maneuvered around the kitchen, and everything was pretty quiet. After eating, Jeffrey put the dishes away and I took Kaylee by the hand and led her out to the back patio so we could talk privately. We barely had time to sit down on a couple of chairs before I let her speak. You fucking knew she was cheating on me, and you didn't say a word, I hissed. Kaylee jumped back at my outburst, and her eyes began to water. She lowered her gaze, began to speak, and then finally looked at my exhausted face. I thought it was great what you and Mom were doing for Uncle Gary. And when Mom did what she did, well, at first I was a little shocked, but when I thought about it, I began to look at it as courage, sadness, compassion, love, and tragedy. It was almost like Shakespeare. I didn't even think about the fact that she could get pregnant. I thought he was too sick for that, plus I assumed she was on birth control. What about the tragedy that my marriage became? Have you thought at least a little about good old Dad? Of course not. The children returned to college on Sunday afternoon. After that, it was just the three of us, and the house was damn quiet. Several times over the next few days, Tracy tried to ask me to help with the baby, even just to hold her for a few minutes. I refused each time, much to her disappointment. "You're going to play like a 5-year-old with me," she yelled at me one day when she asked me to hold the baby for a minute for some reason. "Grow up. Put on your big boy pants." In all the years we'd been together, Tracy had probably never uttered a swear word at me more than a few times. I knew she was angry, but that wasn't my problem. I looked at her like a zombie and silently left the room. Work was my consolation. I could be away from home for 40 hours a week. When I was at home, I was often left alone. I had something to work on. I realized that I should not punish the child. It was not her fault, but at the same time, it was not my concern. She was Tracy's concern. Ultimately, I came to the decision that divorce was my only option. I couldn't handle Tracy's betrayal and disrespect, and every time I looked at the baby, all I saw in my mind was Tracy and Gary having sex. I returned home to find Tracy sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the contents of a large manila envelope laid out in front of her. She sniffled and cried. "I'll probably order some food, pepperoni pizza and breadsticks, okay?" I said quietly, entering the room. "What do you care about, dinner?" She hissed at me. Her tone was full of venom. "Do you not love me anymore?" I sighed heavily, took a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. "Not as much as a few weeks ago," I responded. "You don't see or can't see that you ruined everything when you climbed into our best friend's bed. Now, if I were you, I would get myself a lawyer and go and tell Gary's parents that they have a granddaughter. I'm sure they will be absolutely delighted. You know, I don't want a divorce. I love you. I want you to calm down and think about it. Would you be better off alone? I doubt it. Think about it, darling." That's all I was thinking about. It's not about me. The point is, you broke our vows and ripped out my heart, I said. "But if you love me, isn't there forgiveness in your heart? We can get through this. We belong together, Bobby, you know that." I thought I knew it, but this isn't one of those cases where you can just say, "I'm sorry," and everything will magically get better. 24 years wasted. My first call was to my son. I laid out the essence of Tracy's actions and that the child was Gary's child. He listened in silence, then I heard a whisper of, "Damn." I told him I filed for divorce. "I hope so, Dad. This is absolutely the right decision." What was Mom thinking? He tried to console me. I could tell he was very angry with his mother. I tried to calm him down by reminding him that despite what Tracy had done to me, I knew she still loved him just as much as before. He asked me what I was going to do with the child. Absolutely nothing, neither financially nor emotionally. I don't have to support her or worry about her. "I know everything will be fine financially," I replied. "Help take care of your sister." Half-sister, Dad, half-sister. I didn't tell my parents anything until the day Tracy was served. My father was angry at both of us, at Tracy for her betrayal and at me for agreeing to leave Tracy alone with Gary for any length of time. You knew they had something for each other years before. I can't believe you could be so naive, even if you trusted her completely. Come on, man. You know you can't trust any other man when it comes to your woman. I had to admit that he was right. I had to fight tooth and nail to keep Tracy from being alone with Gary. This, at least, was on my conscience. Mom looked at things completely differently than Dad. In her opinion, I was wrong for leaving Tracy and not trying to make peace. "Everyone makes mistakes," she told me quietly. while Dad sat and frowned. "Mom, it would be a mistake if she slept with him once." Sleeping with him for 4 months was a conscious decision, hardly a mistake, and sleeping with him, without contraception, is incomprehensible, I said. "However, Bobby, you know you still love her, and she will need help raising the child. It's your job, Robert. By the way, I will still consider this child my third grandson." Besides her voice, the fact that Mom called me by my legal name told me she was on Tracy's side. Dad looked at the ceiling, then back at me. He knew he would get hell from her later. I didn't call Kaylee. I thought she was probably Tracy's first call after being served. My thought was proven correct when an irritated Kaylee called me later that day. "Uncle Gary died, Dad. Forget about sex. Now she can't take it all back. Move ahead. You and your mom still love each other, and now there's a baby too. Be a man for Mom and Bobby G," she practically ordered. Wise advice from someone who didn't feel the need to tell her own father that her mother was cheating with another man. "Somehow, I don't feel the need to worry about what you think anymore," I replied. I later learned that Gary's parents were shocked and delighted to learn that they had a grandson. They were upset that Tracy planned to keep the news a secret, but told her they understood her reasoning. A day later, they called me and begged me to stay with Tracy and raise Gary's daughter. They knew that we had been very close for many years and felt that I was the best person to be a father to Gary's daughter. "Thank you for your trust and compliment, but I'm not that kind of person. I have to admit that I'm so angry at Gary and Tracy that I can't see straight." I could practically feel Gary's parents wince as the line went silent. I felt bad, but not that bad. I was honest. Of course, my relatives also called. They also begged me to stay with Tracy. They admitted that what she did was terrible and stupid, but they were confident that she still loved me and wanted to raise her child with me. I thanked them for their concern, but told them I didn't know if I could ever get over the horror and stupidity. Of course, Tracy fought for a divorce. She and her lawyer managed to arrange 12 joint consultations. I knew I had no choice, but I wasn't going to be a pushover during the sessions. Jocelyn McAdams, Ph.D., looked very prim and professional when I walked into her office. I guessed she was about 10 years older than Tracy and she was wearing a gray jacket over a very business-like skirt, which I noticed when she stood up to greet me with a firm handshake. Tracy was already sitting in the chair to my right, in front of the large desk. She asked Tracy to tell her side of the story first, and since I already knew her, I guess I kind of fell into my own little world. I'm sure Tracy emphasized compassion and downplayed the betrayal. Anyway, the next thing I know is the doc waking me up from my reverie. I assumed, wrongly as it turned out, that I would have to tell my side of the story. "Mr. Martin, it seems to me that the power here belongs to you. You can save your marriage and your family by simply being a grown man, putting your ego aside and working to get back to what you had with Tracy." Wow, I didn't expect this from someone who was supposed to be a professional. It was basically the same position that almost everyone took. I had to become a man and accept what happened. Did I end up in an alternate universe? "Wait a second, Doc." I started before she interrupted me. "Doctor or Dr. McAdams, please. We will keep a professional approach here. I don't want any of you to treat me like a personal friend or ally." "Do you think so, Dr. McAdams? Is this the main thing for you? It seems to me that you have already chosen a side without even hearing my story." I stood up, turned around, and walked out. On the way home, I called my lawyer and told him that he needed to find a neutral consultant, or I would not attend any further sessions. The second consultant at least listened to my story after accepting Tracy's story, but I knew I was still swimming upstream. "You admitted that you still love your wife, Mr. Martin. Your wife still loves you very much, and now also has a child. What needs to be done to restore the family?" Dr. Lauren Avent asked. "First of all, we have never been a family. This is not my child. I won't raise someone else's child," I replied. "So this is about your ego?" Dr. Avent said, with a more than smug expression on her thin face. "I can't win with you guys, can I?" I asked. with more than a little disgust in my voice. Why is this even about me? Let me paint a picture for you with words, and I'll speak slowly so you can catch it all. I was not the one who deceived my wife and broke my vow by having sex with another person, and I was not the one who gave birth to someone else's child. You should ask her why she made the choices she made and what she thinks she can do to overcome those bad choices, if at all. I looked towards Tracy and saw that she was frowning. I saw that the consultant was trying her best to keep an indifferent face. Like the old Monty Python joke, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, and I didn't expect it. Mr. Martin, if you divorce your wife and in the future marry another woman who already has children, will you in fact be raising someone else's child? Asked Dr. Avent. Well, I think you got my point, Doc, but in Tracy's case, the baby was conceived while she was married to me, which I think is a pretty big difference, isn't it? She gave me a slight nod, but obviously didn't finish. But since the man in question died before the child was born, don't we disagree? Aren't you just being petty in this matter? Said Dr. Avent. Pettiness? Pettiness is when you know you did something wrong but decide to lie by not saying it. She didn't admit anything to me until I caught her. She started to continue, but I finished. Listen, Doc, this is funny, yes. I still love her. You can't just turn it off right away. But how can she say she loves me when she cheated on me, got pregnant with someone else's child, and tried to pass off the child as mine? She may love me a little, but if she loved me as much as she says, this wouldn't happen. It wasn't a one-and-done thing, Doc. She and her lover entered into numerous relationships. Now she tells everyone that it was purely out of compassion. He was a close friend and he was dying. Well, if it was so compassionate, why didn't she come to me, her husband, and at least discuss this decision with me? Because she knew the answer. I would have said no, and she knew it. I understand that it's her body, and she probably thinks she can do whatever she wants with it, but as soon as we said the vow, she gave up the right to unilaterally give her body to another man, at least without discussing it or informing me, just as I must do if I ever want to give my body to another woman, for any reason. Once we have made our vow to each other, we no longer operate in a vacuum. It's simple, Doc. Doc sat like a patient in a coma, only with her eyes open. She tapped her finger on her tablet for a few seconds. So, do you have enough love left to take the step forward and try to become a husband and father? You say that you still have love for your wife. The child's biological father is dead. There's no reason to make her a victim, Dr. Avent said. Step forward? Nice wording, Doc. Attack my manhood. Apply guilt. My wife and our best friend deliberately tore my heart out, Doc. If he were alive now, I would punch him in the face. My love for her is weakening every minute. Child, it's unfortunate, but not my problem. Translation, there is no chance of saving this marriage. We had a second session with the consultant. I didn't say anything other than hello and goodbye. Tracy whined and begged and cried. I see that you are not going to break yourself and even think about it, Mr. Martin. I'll tell the judge that it's over between you two. Thank you, Doc. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, just in time for Christmas. We lived in a state where divorce is no fault, so we split everything equally, except Tracy paid me for my half of the house, which was fine with me since she had a child to raise. When Gary died, he left us most of his estate, so Tracy had money for a house. She also received several years of alimony since I made more than her. Although my son was still in my corner, so to speak, I understood that he wanted to spend Christmas with as much family as possible, which meant his mother, sister, and younger half-sister. I told him that I was not against it, and we would celebrate the new year together. 2 days before Christmas, I stopped by my former home to drop off gifts for everyone, including my ex-wife and her child. It wasn't much for Tracy and the baby, but I didn't want to look petty in front of my kids. Tracy was surprised to see me at first when she opened the door, holding Bobby Geraldine. She looked at my 2 bags of gifts in surprise and hesitantly let me in. She led me into the living room where there was a Christmas tree and everything was decorated just like we always did. The only difference was that I didn't do the installation and decorating like I usually do. Tracy saw the look on my face as I looked at the decorations and held back tears. How about some eggnog, Bobby? And then I'll put the bags under the tree. Could you hold the baby for a minute? I wanted to be rude. I really did. But I just couldn't. I hesitantly reached out and took the baby, her baby, with Gary. I held back the bile that began to rise from my stomach as she went for the eggnog. I stood holding the baby right away from my body, as if she were some kind of explosive device, for about 30 seconds. Then I put her on my right arm, football style, as I had done with my own children long ago, and sat down on a chair. Tracy came in with 2 glasses of eggnog, one for each of us, and sat down on the second chair in the room, smiling at me when she saw the baby pressed against my arm. This brings back a lot of memories, Bobby. You were always so kind to the children when they were little, she said softly. Not every man is given the ability to handle children. I smiled shyly. The baby was beautiful. Basically, he looked like his beautiful mother, but I could never feel comfortable with her given the circumstances. If you don't forget, can you ever truly forgive? I don't think so, although I know that many people, especially in my family, disagree with me. We made small talk for a while. Then Tracy took 2 bags of gifts and began placing them under the tree. When she came to the first package with Bobby Geraldine's name on it, she stopped and asked, with a cheerful expression on her face. You didn't have to turn it on, Bobby, Tracy said as a tear rolled down her face. Christmas is a holiday for children of all ages, baby. I couldn't leave your baby unattended. I looked down at the baby in my hand. Under favorable circumstances, she could be mine. I felt a lump in my throat. Damn it. I couldn't hate the child, even though I hated what her mother had done. I was sure that Tracy had not accidentally handed the child into my arms. Tracy choked again when she found the first package with her name on it. Oh, Bobby, is it true? You shouldn't have. I really didn't expect anything. I didn't give you anything. I'm sorry. Don't worry about anything, Tracy. I just want you guys to have a great Christmas. You know, you can come in person. You will be welcome. We will have more than enough food. I know the kids will be excited too, she said. Not this time, Trace. Maybe in a year. It's too soon. Too soon for my mind and heart. Tracy lowered her eyes. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was honest. My wounds still stung. On Christmas Eve, I found myself at Barnes & Noble late at night. I was reading Clive Cussler's new book that I bought for myself and drinking a peppermint mocha latte at the Starbucks inside the bookstore. Looking around, I found 2 other losers also reading at Starbucks. They practically had to kick me and 2 other losers out when they finally closed. I returned home to a quiet house, but I was ready. The day before, I bought chicken salad and made some toast to put on it. Ruffles chips and Don Julio tequila completed the meal. Damn, I know how to live. Christmas morning, I woke up with a slight hangover. 4 aspirins, a couple of cinnamon Pop-Tarts, and 3 cups of coffee. Later, I was ready for a big Christmas party. Just one problem, I didn't have a holiday planned. I went to my parents' house, and the 3 of us enjoyed Mum's dinner with a baked ham and a few gifts. My children gave gifts for me to my parents when they found out that I was coming for the holiday. After dinner, we enjoyed hot chocolate with mint schnapps. I have to admit that my mind was filled with memories of past Christmases when we were a family. I admitted to myself that, to some extent, I still loved Tracy, and I had some doubts that I had made the right move. Apparently, I wasn't the only one thinking about my past life. We hope you don't mind, Bobby, but Dad and I consider Bobby Geraldine our granddaughter, and we bought her presents for Christmas, Mom said to break the silence in the room. He's dead, Bobby. Gary is gone. The child will never know him. She will accept any good person as her father. We don't completely agree with what Tracy did, but to some extent, we understand it, and we still love her. You can be that good person, Bobby. You must be such a good person. Everyone wants it, and I think you do too. You just don't know how to admit it to yourself. You think everyone will think less of you if you bring her back and raise the child as your own. Mom had tears in her eyes when she finished. Dad looked at me straight. Could I be the only one who didn't see it? Maybe, but every time I thought that way, I just knew that I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror if I did that. She cheated on me for months. She tried to cheat on me, and she had a child with another man. Her words about sleeping with Gary being compassionate rang hollow to me. A year later, practically nothing has changed in my life. I went to work and returned home alone to my apartment. I didn't go on dates, and my number of friends was greatly reduced. To tell the truth, I've never had many friends. Tracy had a lot of friends, and we had a lot of friends as a couple, but both mostly abandoned me after the divorce. I wasn't surprised that her friends left me, but I was surprised that practically all of our friends left. At least I was surprised until one of these former friends explained the situation to me. It seemed that Tracy was telling everyone that I left her after the baby was born, without mentioning that the child was not mine. I was sitting at the next bar, alone, of course, when Carl and Susie Dimmick walked in and took a table. Carl and Susie were one of those couples that I considered one of our friends. But when I walked up to their table to say hello, I received a very cool reception. Susie openly mocked me, and Carl was hardly polite. Considering I hadn't done anything to offend them, I was furious at the poor reception and wasn't about to leave quietly. "What did I do to you two?" I growled. "Not us, but Tracy," Susie hissed. "How could you just leave the sweetest woman in the world because she had a late child? You suck, you know that?" "So that's what it's all about?" I said, almost in shock. "How about you listen to the whole story and then decide for yourself?" They both asked me to sit down, but I was too excited and just stood in front of their table. I moved closer because I didn't want to shout. "So, I can assume that no one mentioned to you that the late child you are talking about is not mine. She lived with her ex-boyfriend and got knocked up by him, and this is his child. He died of cancer a month after she got pregnant, and she tried to trick me into thinking it was my baby. 24 years of marriage, and this is the respect and devotion I receive. So no, I didn't leave her. She left me. Fuck her. Fuck you all. You and the horse you came on." I left two stunned former friends at the table. My second Christmas as a divorced guy started out exactly like the first. This year, at the Losers Club at Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, there were 4 people, me, another guy, and 2 women. I looked over the top of my book and sized up the women. One had curly red hair, freckles, and a pretty face, and the other, wow, why is she here? She was beautiful, to say the least. Asian, with waist-length black hair and curves hidden in a sweatshirt and skinny jeans. She had perfect ageless skin, and I guessed she was somewhere between 50 and 55 years old. I watched her for about a minute and then decided to hell with it. All she could do was say no. I grabbed my book and latte and headed towards her. She raised her head when I came within talking distance. "I didn't see you here last Christmas Eve. You're new to the Losers Club on Christmas Eve. I'm Bobby, the club president. What brought the beautiful woman to this significant day?" She giggled at my bad joke, and it was the most adorable sound I'd heard in a long time. I continued. "I know you won't believe this, but I have a second Hungry Man dinner in the freezer that I can heat up tonight if you don't have a reservation yet. I know we just met, but..." I gave her my best puppy dog look, hoping I remembered how it's done. "Well, I usually don't do such crazy things, but since you are the president of the club, and you say Hungry Man, yes, I agree. By the way, I'm Angel Wong. Bobby Martin, club president, at your service." I gave her my address and told her to meet me at 6. I left to put the dinners in the oven. Both dinners were already heating up when she arrived promptly at 6. I had to admit to myself that maybe we were both more than a little crazy. We ate dinner at the kitchen table and drank a bottle of Burgundy. I told her how it was that I was sitting in Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, and then she told me her story. She was 5 years older than me, 52 years old, and had been divorced for 10 years after leaving an abusive husband. She and her husband had been married for 16 years, and his abuse began after 10 years and continued until he sent her to the hospital with a broken jaw. Angel was a small woman, standing 5 feet tall and weighing about 100 pounds. Her ex was 5 feet, 2 inches tall and weighed about 120 pounds, she said. He was often bullied as a child, and when under stress, he would become loud and verbally rude. After 10 years of marriage, it escalated into physical violence. But when he calmed down, he always apologized and asked for forgiveness. Like many abused women, she simply could not bring herself to break up with her husband, believing that she was the reason for his cruelty. In the end, it took a mental health counselor to convince her that it wasn't her fault. And when she woke up in the hospital after another fight, she knew she had to divorce him for her physical safety. Her husband was convicted of battery and spent 2 years in prison, after which he completely disappeared from her life. They divorced while he was in prison. Fortunately, they had no children. According to her, after the divorce, Angel did not go on dates very often, and she did not have relatives in this part of the country. She admitted, holding back tears, that Christmas has always been the most depressing time of the year for her. I know it was crazy for me to agree to come here today, but I just didn't want to be alone. And how could I pass up the hungry man dinner? She explained. I felt sorry for myself at Barnes & Noble, but after talking with Angel, I realized that I was still doing better than a lot of people. We sat on my couch together, drank wine, and watched a few Christmas movies, starting with Dickens' version of Mr. Magoo, A Christmas Carol. I knew there was something special about this woman when she completely agreed with my opinion that Mr. Magoo was the ultimate Scrooge. Then we watched The Grinch, and about halfway through It's a Wonderful Life, I noticed that she had fallen asleep. There seemed to be a smile on her face, and she looked so peaceful that I took a large blanket out of the closet, covered her halfway, and crawled under the other half. I must have fallen asleep too at some point, but when I woke up, she and I were not sitting side by side. I'm not sure how it happened, but when I woke up, we were lying with Angel's head on my chest and half of her body on top of mine. I wrapped one arm around her body, hugging her tightly, while my other hand slid into her back pocket. It was snowing on TV. It was strange, but it felt so right as I lay there holding Angel while she slept for about 20 more minutes. She stirred and slowly opened her eyes, looking at me in confusion. I tilted my head as high as possible and gently kissed her nose. She scrunched it up adorably and then gave me the brightest smile I'd seen in years. "Good morning?" she asked timidly. "Merry Christmas," I replied, hugging her tighter. We lay together, motionless and smiling, for another 5 minutes before she finally spoke. "I've never done this before, I swear," she protested, her cheeks practically flushed. "But is it just me, or do you feel it too?" I grinned at her from ear to ear. "Yes, damn it, I feel it." She moved a couple of inches closer to me until our lips touched, and we kissed passionately. We did this a few more times before we started taking off our clothes. I played with her beautiful big breasts, which were bouncing along with her. Her eyes were glazed, and her breathing was rapid. She collapsed onto my chest, and then captured my lips with another fierce kiss. Then we hugged. I inhaled the scent of her skin. I nibbled on the inside of her shoulders. I thought this was crazy. I had just met this woman, but we felt so good together. Then I looked up and saw her looking at me, and I could tell she was practically thinking the same thing. "This may be crazy," I began, "but you don't have any plans for today, do you? Because I have everything I need for a first-class Christmas dinner. And if I'm going to go through all this trouble, well, it certainly wouldn't hurt to have a beautiful woman sitting across the table from me." Her smirk turned into a wide smile that captured my heart. "I need a shower, and I didn't bring a change of clothes with me. I can run home for a few minutes and come right back," she said. I smiled back at her. "My shower is big enough for 2, and I'm sure I have a shirt or something that will fit you." Her almond-shaped eyes sparkled at me. "If you can tolerate me without makeup, I agree," she said. We took a shower together. I found her one of my smaller sweaters, which she wore without wearing anything underneath. It went down to her mid-thighs and was tight enough to watch her breasts jiggle and jiggle as she moved. "Looks good," I said, while she showed me the outfit. We went into the kitchen, and I poured each of us a glass of Riesling and started preparing the food. Angel sat down at the kitchen table and pulled both legs towards her, which meant half of her ass was visible and distracted me. "So you really have nowhere to be today? Family?" Nothing? She asked. Actually, I was invited to a big family Christmas dinner this year, but I told them I had another meeting, I replied. My ex invites everyone to my old house, the children, my ancestors, her ancestors, Gary's ancestors. This is a setup. She'll make sure I'm holding her adorable baby. All the parents will tell me I should be a man, and she'll tell me she loves me and needs me, and we can put everything back together. I told her I had another meeting, but everyone knows I'm lying. I told her I would try to do this for a while if I could. None of them can understand me. I didn't cheat. I don't have to apologize because Tracy cheated and screwed up. We had something special until we didn't. But speaking of something special, how about we talk about ourselves? We both smiled. I walked over to Angel and we kissed deeply. At that moment, I heard the sound of a key in the lock of my door, and my door opened. My son came in and called me. Angel and I froze in the middle of the kiss. Pa, pa, he called just before he noticed us. Oh, shit. He looked at us kissing, then looked down at Angel's completely exposed legs and half-exposed ass. I think all three of us blushed. Angel quickly lowered her legs and stood behind me, which was as modest as she could look in that sweater. Jeffrey immediately turned his back to us, ostensibly to preserve Angel's modesty, although I think he was just as embarrassed as she was. Mom knows I have the key to your house, and she asked me to come here and drag you back to the house for Christmas dinner because she was sure you were sitting here alone and being pathetic. Well, I think you told the truth about your new meeting, and it's hardly pathetic. Sorry if I interrupted you. You didn't interfere with anything except my Christmas preparations, I said, perhaps a little too quickly, as Angel and I exchanged confused glances at each other. Jeffrey, I need you to turn around so I can properly introduce you to Angel, my Angel. Jeffrey turned reluctantly and walked into the kitchen. Yes, it was quite obvious that Angel was naked under the sweater, but at least she was covered. She looked at me, sort of shrugged, and then looked away. Jeffrey couldn't help himself, being a red man. He looked at Angel again, and then gave me what I would call a nod of admiration. It was nice to meet you, Angel. And thank you for coming to see my father, Jeffrey said. It's my pleasure, Jeffrey. Your father is a great guy, Angel replied. Yes, it seems that some family members forgot about it for a while, he said. Did everyone like the gifts I bought? I asked, changing the subject. How did Bobby G like her gifts? You still have your instincts, Dad. Everyone loves their things. The child likes the things you bought. You can't believe how much she got under the tree when all three sets of grandparents were there. Fine. Okay, I replied. Jeffrey then said it was time for him to go. He nodded to Angel and I hugged him tightly. New Year? I asked. I promise that Angel will have more clothes. Oh yes, he replied, blushing deeply. Angel gave me a hard look after Jeffrey left. It wasn't too awkward, was it? She asked. And what is this about the new year? Am I not invited first? No, not this time, I replied. But where else is my bride? Maybe on New Year's? Pretty confident, aren't you? She asked. Be even more confident when you pick out a ring tomorrow morning at Cairo's. Will you let me go home first so I can get dressed a little? If you insist, I replied, trying to look disappointed. The next morning, Angel chose a 1-carat marquise-cut diamond engagement ring. Then we went to lunch and I called my son and then my parents with the news that I was engaged. My son seemed very happy for me. My parents, not so much. I think they were still under the illusion that I would take Tracy back and raise her child as my own. This is so unexpected, isn't it, dear? Asked my mother. Are you sure you're not doing this to annoy Tracy? Do you know that she still loves you, darling? Mom, I'm not trying to annoy anyone. As for Tracy still loving me, her actions speak for themselves, don't they? Tracy loves Tracy. I didn't bother telling my daughter about it. We repaired our relationship a little, but she still took her mother's side, insisting that Tracy's action was heroic and connected with love. I figured that sooner or later she would find out and call me to choosy her mother over me. After more than 25 years with Tracy, my developing relationship with Angel made no sense. I couldn't explain our attraction to each other or how well she fit into my life. We could talk about anything, and it seemed to me that we had been together forever. I didn't believe in love at first sight, but everything told me that it was so. Angel wasn't a child either, and she seemed just as stunned by our instant and deep attraction as I was. We spent a lot of time learning everything at first, but then we realized we were sucking the life out of it and should just let it flow naturally. Naturally, it was good. A month later, she moved in with me, and for the next 6 months, we were rarely apart. Mom and Dad seemed to like her, even though she wasn't Tracy, but Kaylee didn't hide her dislike, I guess because she still wanted me to get back together with her mother. 6 months later, we had a small wedding. I invited both kids and my parents, and Angel invited a cousin and friend and their families. I booked a room for a small celebration at one of my favorite restaurants. It was a great day, except that Kaylee cornered me and asked why Tracy and Bobby G and my ex-in-laws weren't invited. Because your mother is my ex-wife, and inviting her would be disrespectful to Angel. Besides, you seem to have forgotten that we are not friends. Former relatives are also not invited. Angel and Tracy finally met 2 years later when Kaylee got married. Tracy planned and executed a wonderful event, and I happily paid for everything. Angel, being a beautiful, smart, and stylish lady, stayed away from the mother of the bride and her plans. The only role I played in the wedding, other than the role of financier, was the traditional one, walking the bride down the aisle. My heart was filled with pride, and my internal memory machine was working overtime. Several times I looked at Tracy and remembered her and Kaylee doing coloring books and baking cookies. It reminded me that not everything was bad between us. We had 24 good years. Angel understood me perfectly and hugged me as we sat in the church pew. I turned to her and she gently pressed her lips to mine. Then I knew I could make it through the rest of the day. Angel only interacted with Tracy when necessary during the rehearsal, dinner, and wedding, not out of fear, but out of a sense of rightness. Tracy, for her part, walked around with an annoyed expression whenever she looked in Angel's direction. I later learned that she and all 6 grandparents were convinced that she had usurped Tracy's rightful place and that the marriage was only short-term. Our short-term marriage just passed the 25-year mark. Angel and I celebrated with a nice dinner and a quiet evening of lovemaking. Of course, it wasn't the wild and crazy night of sex that it might have been 15 years ago, but neither of us are kids anymore. After that, we cuddled with each other for a while and then fell asleep in our arms. Thinking about it, I really can't complain about how life has treated me. I had a good first marriage for 24 years. Then I came back and now have a great second marriage for 25 years. My 2 children are married and have given me 3 wonderful grandchildren. Tracy never remarried. From the words of my children, I think that not many men were interested in a middle-aged woman with a small child, even if she was a pretty woman. They believe she had some kind of relationship along the way, otherwise she might have killed someone by now. My son, the only family member who interacted with me regularly after the divorce, told me that Tracy didn't even date for the first 5 years after my marriage, still believing my marriage wouldn't last. I'm sure Angel was sorry to disappoint her.